November 10th, 1944, Camp Livingston, Louisiana. As the late afternoon sun dipped behind the towering pine trees, a military transport truck rolled slowly through the gates of the prisoner of war camp. Beneath its canvas cover sat 43 German women, silent and weary. Their faces reflected the strain of weeks spent crossing the Atlantic and traveling by train through the American South. They wore what remained of their gray auxiliary uniforms, some ripped and dirt-stained from their capture in France, others still displaying the insignia of the German Women's Auxiliary Corps. These arrivals were unlike any prisoners Camp Livingston had prepared to receive. Standing near the entrance, Major Thomas Fletcher studied the paperwork in his hands. Since 1943, his camp had held thousands of German and Italian male prisoners, but women had never been among them. The War Department's notice had reached him only 3 days earlier, leaving little time to arrange a separate enclosure within the larger facility. He looked up as the truck finally halted, the sharp hiss of its brakes cutting through the warm Louisiana air. The women stepping down appeared nothing like the enemy's soldiers he was accustomed to processing. Their ages ranged from about 18 to 35. Their movements were slow, cautious, and uncertain. Most carried small bags filled with a few personal belongings that had survived capture and transport. Fletcher immediately noticed how thin they were. Their uniforms hung loosely from bodies that clearly showed the effects of months of inadequate food. Among them was 24-year-old Greta Hoffman, once a radio operator from Dresden. As she climbed down from the truck, the heavy Louisiana heat wrapped around her. It felt completely foreign compared to the cold November weather she remembered back in Europe. Her dark eyes moved across the strange landscape before her, wooden barracks, watchtowers, and long stretches of barbed wire reaching into the distance. Just behind her, a younger woman named Ilse Braun nearly lost her balance, weakened by the exhausting journey. Greta quickly reached out and steadied her. The brief look they exchanged spoke volumes, revealing the fear and uncertainty both were trying to hide. The American guards themselves seemed unsure how to handle these unexpected prisoners. Private Daniel Martinez, whose family owned a small farm in Texas, had been assigned to the women's compound. He observed as they organized themselves into uneven lines. Despite their exhaustion, traces of military discipline remained visible in their posture and movements. One of the women, scarcely older than a teenager, suddenly began to wobble. Acting on instinct, Martinez stepped forward and offered his arm to help her, but she immediately pulled away, her eyes widening with alarm at the unexpected gesture. Major Fletcher soon began the intake process with professional efficiency. Through an interpreter, he explained the camp's regulations and daily procedures. The women would live in a separate area supervised by both male and female personnel. Like all prisoners, they would be assigned work, though duties would be selected according to their abilities. They would also receive the same food rations provided to other prisoners, prepared in accordance with the standards required by the Geneva Convention. As the interpreter repeated his words in German, Greta listened carefully. There was something in the major's voice that caught her off guard, something she had not expected to hear. There was no bitterness in his voice, no sign of cruelty or hatred. Only a weary officer carrying out his responsibilities with a degree of decency wartime circumstances still allowed. For Greta, it planted the first small doubt about everything she had been taught regarding Americans. The women's compound consisted of 4 wooden barracks positioned around a square courtyard, enclosed by its own fence inside the larger campgrounds. The buildings were simple yet orderly, furnished with rows of metal bunks, thin mattresses, and coarse wool blankets. When the German women entered their assigned barracks that evening, they moved with the practiced discipline of military personnel. Beds were chosen without discussion, and the few belongings they possessed were unpacked in near silence. Greta selected a lower bunk beside a window where she could glimpse a narrow stretch of sky beyond the barbed wire. Elsa claimed the bunk above her. Before long, 2 more women settled nearby. Anna Schmidt, a former nurse from Munich, arranged her things across from them with calm composure. Next to her, 20-year-old Margaret Klein held tightly to a small family photograph, her hand shaking slightly as she slipped it beneath her pillow. As darkness settled over the camp, hushed conversations in German drifted through the barracks. The women exchanged pieces of their stories, gradually understanding how each had arrived in this unfamiliar place. Most had been captured during the Allied push through France. Some had served as clerks and administrative staff, while others had worked as nurses or communications operators. A few had simply found themselves trapped in the path of retreating German forces. Fear lingered everywhere. For years, they had been told terrifying stories about life as prisoners, especially female prisoners, in enemy custody. The propaganda they had grown up hearing portrayed Americans as brutal, merciless, and driven by vengeance. Yet the reality they had encountered during their first hours in captivity did not match those warnings. The guards had remained reserved but not hostile. The barracks were plain, yet dry, secure, and clean. No one had threatened them, struck them, or raised a voice against them. The next morning began before sunrise with the ringing of a bell. The women climbed from their bunks, tired and stiff after a restless night on unfamiliar beds. They were escorted to a washing area where cold water poured from simple metal faucets. After months spent traveling and moving through various detention centers, the chance to wash properly felt like an unexpected comfort, despite the chill of November. Breakfast awaited them in a mess hall that had been divided off from the sections used by male prisoners. The women entered quietly, their eyes lowered and their expectations guarded. What they received was a metal tray containing oatmeal, a slice of bread, and a cup of weak coffee. The meal was plain, institutional, and lacking any real flavor. But it was hot, and there was enough of it. For women who had spent the final months of the war in Europe watching food supplies shrink day after day, even this modest breakfast seemed remarkably generous. Standing guard nearby, Private Martinez observed them as they ate. He noticed the care with which they handled every bite, the slow pace of their eating, and the fact that not a single crumb went to waste. As the women ate, one of the older prisoners suddenly began to weep softly. Tears slipped down her face and fell into her bowl of oatmeal. When another woman quietly asked in German what had upset her, she answered in a trembling voice that she had not seen so much food served at a single meal in more than a year. The American guards nearby had no idea that moments like this were already beginning to dismantle many of the beliefs these women had held about their enemy. Over the following days, camp life settled into a predictable routine. The German women were assigned light duties, mostly in the laundry facilities and food preparation areas. They carried out their work quietly, with efficiency and attention to detail. Even the simplest tasks reflected the discipline and organization ingrained by their military training. Yet certain things soon caught the attention of the American staff. Sergeant Rebecca Walsh, one of the few female personnel assigned to supervise the women's compound, noticed that many of the prisoners were secretly saving food. After meals, she would discover bread crusts tucked into pockets, vegetables wrapped carefully in pieces of cloth, and small portions hidden away wherever they could be concealed. At first, she assumed it was ordinary prisoner behavior, a precaution against possible shortages. But the more closely she watched, the more she realized it was something far more serious. These women had experienced genuine hunger. Greta and her bunkmates had developed a routine of their own. Any food that could be spared was carefully preserved and hidden inside their footlockers. Late at night, when empty stomachs made sleep impossible, they divided the saved portions among themselves. The habit had been formed during the desperate final months of the war in Europe, when supply networks had broken down and even military personnel often went days without receiving enough to eat. The steady food supply at the American camp felt almost unreal to them, something too uncertain to trust completely. The youngest women displayed the clearest signs of malnutrition. Margaret's clothing hung loosely from her body, making her appear almost childlike. Her cheekbones were sharply defined, and dark shadows rested beneath her eyes. Anna, drawing on her experience as a nurse, grew increasingly concerned about several prisoners who showed clear symptoms of anemia and vitamin deficiencies. She attempted to request medical assistance through the camp interpreter, but limited communication and a reluctance to attract attention made the effort difficult. Meanwhile, Private Martinez noticed Ilsa struggling with a laundry basket that should have been easy for a healthy woman in her early 20s to carry. As he stepped forward to help, she instinctively pulled away. Before she did, however, he noticed the uncontrollable trembling in her hands. That evening, he shared his concerns with Sergeant Walsh. "These women are starving," he said plainly. "Whatever they went through before arriving here, they are not getting enough food to recover from it." Walsh brought the matter directly to Major Fletcher. The major responded immediately, ordering a full medical evaluation of the prisoners. The examination was conducted by Dr. Samuel Brennan, a veteran physician who had served during the North African campaign. He had witnessed the effects of malnutrition before, but even he was startled by the condition of the women. More than half of them were dangerously underweight. Several displayed symptoms associated with scurvy and other nutritional deficiency illnesses. Their physical condition revealed a level of deprivation far more severe than anyone at Camp Livingston had initially realized. Their bodies had been pushed so far by deprivation that they were effectively consuming their own reserves to survive. While the standard prisoner rations were sufficient for healthy adults, these women required far more nutrition if they were going to recover. The medical examination became a turning point in the way the camp staff viewed their unexpected prisoners. They were no longer seen simply as enemy captives awaiting eventual repatriation. They were people who had endured hardship and suffering, individuals whose needs extended beyond the minimum standards required by international agreements. Dr. Brennan submitted a detailed report that went beyond routine medical recommendations. He advised providing supplemental rations, vitamin treatments, and a carefully managed increase in food intake to prevent the complications associated with refeeding syndrome. Major Fletcher approved every recommendation without hesitation. But in his view, the women needed more than medical treatment alone. If they had truly endured starvation, then they deserved to be treated with dignity as well. The changes began gradually. The women's meals were quietly expanded beyond the normal prison allotments. Fresh vegetables started appearing regularly on their trays. Meat portions became slightly more generous. Milk, something many of them had not seen for years, was added to breakfast. The prisoners noticed a difference immediately. At every meal, eyes widened with surprise. Yet few dared comment on it, as though acknowledging the improvement might somehow cause it to disappear. Sergeant Walsh eventually decided to confront the food hoarding issue directly. One evening, through the interpreter, she gathered the women together and addressed them openly. "You don't have to hide food anymore," she told them. "There will be food tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after. This isn't a trick. This is simply how people are fed in America." The women exchanged uncertain looks. Greta, who had gradually become an unofficial spokesperson among prisoners, finally responded in careful, broken English. "In Germany, they told us Americans would starve prisoners," she said. "They said you hated us and wanted us to suffer." A brief flash of frustration crossed Sergeant Walsh's face, not toward Greta, but toward the years of propaganda that had shaped such beliefs. "We don't hate you," she answered firmly. "You may be prisoners, but you are still human beings, and that matters here." Trust did not appear overnight, but little by little, small acts of kindness began creating connections. One afternoon, Private Martinez noticed that Margaret still looked especially weak and undernourished. From the guard's dining area, he brought her an extra apple and handed it to her with an awkward smile. She accepted it cautiously. As she looked at the fruit in her hands, tears gathered in her eyes. The gesture itself was simple, yet it meant more than he could have known. On another day, Anna accidentally burned her hand while helping in the kitchen. Rather than dismissing the injury, an American cook named Corporal James Washington immediately escorted her to the medical station. He remained there while Dr. Brennan cleaned and treated the burn. For the German women, these ordinary acts of compassion are more unsettling than cruelty would have been. They had prepared themselves for hostility, retaliation, and confirmation of every frightening story they had heard about their enemies. Instead, they were witnessing something that challenged those beliefs far more effectively than any argument ever could. They were experiencing simple human kindness from the very people they had been taught to fear. Simple kindness shown by ordinary people. People who believe that suffering should be eased whenever possible, no matter where someone came from or what side they had fought for. One evening, Ilsa quietly admitted to Greta that she no longer knew what to believe. "If Americans are supposed to be monsters," she asked softly, "why do they care whether we're hungry? Why does that doctor look at us with concern instead of disgust?" Greta had no answer. All she felt was her own growing uncertainty. The beliefs she had once accepted without hesitation were becoming harder and harder to reconcile with what she was experiencing every day. November 20th, 1944. The date marked 10 days since the German women had arrived at Camp Livingston. That morning, Major Fletcher called for an assembly in the women's compound. His appearance alone suggested that something important was about to be announced. The 43 prisoners gathered in the open space between the barracks. Curiosity mixed with anxiety on their faces. In a prison camp, official announcements were rarely associated with good news. Speaking through the interpreter, Major Fletcher explained that the fourth Thursday of November was an important American holiday known as Thanksgiving. It was a day, he said, when families across the United States came together to express gratitude and share a large festive meal. That year, Thanksgiving would be celebrated on November 23rd, only 3 days away. The Major paused for a moment, carefully considering how to continue. Then he informed them that camp leadership had decided to include the women prisoners in the Thanksgiving celebration. They would receive the same holiday meal being prepared for American personnel stationed at the camp. When the interpreter finished translating, silence settled over the group. The women exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether they had understood correctly. After a moment, Greta cautiously raised a hand. In careful English, she asked, "We will eat the same food as American soldiers." Major Fletcher nodded. "The same food," he replied. "Yes, it's our tradition. On Thanksgiving, everyone in this camp, no matter who they are, receives a proper holiday meal." The announcement became the subject of whispered discussions for the rest of the day. The women struggled to understand why their captors would invite prisoners to take part in a special celebration. In their experience, military holidays might bring slightly larger rations or a small improvement in meals, but nothing close to what the Major seemed to be describing. Some suspected it was merely a public relations gesture intended for visiting Red Cross representatives. Others worried it might be a cruel joke or a promise that would never actually be fulfilled. Anna, drawing on her practical nature as a nurse, tried to temper the excitement beginning to spread among the younger prisoners. "Do not expect too much," she warned them gently. "Perhaps they will simply give us extra bread or a larger bowl of soup. Even that would be generous." Yet even she could not completely extinguish the quiet sense of anticipation that had begun to grow. Sergeant Walsh watched the women's reactions with understanding. Their skepticism made perfect sense to her. For years, these women had been taught that Americans were enemies who would show them no compassion if captured. The idea that they would be welcomed into a treasured national tradition challenged nearly everything they had been told. Meanwhile, Private Martinez had been assigned to assist with Thanksgiving preparations in the camp kitchen. As the work began, he witnessed firsthand the scale of what was being planned for the upcoming holiday. Private Martinez quickly realized just how enormous the planned meal would be. Turkeys were being thawed in large numbers. Sacks of potatoes arrived one after another. Crates of canned vegetables were stacked high in storage areas awaiting preparation. Under the leadership of Corporal Washington, the camp cooks approached the entire operation with the precision and discipline of a military campaign. For them, this was about far more than serving food. It was about preserving a tradition that represented something deeply rooted in American culture and identity. The 3 days between the announcement and Thanksgiving seemed to pass unusually slowly. The German women continued carrying out their daily duties, yet their thoughts repeatedly returned to the holiday meal that awaited them. They had no experience that could help them understand such a gesture from an enemy. Nothing in their past had prepared them for the possibility that their captors might treat them with such unexpected generosity. As Thanksgiving drew closer, the camp kitchen became a center of nonstop activity. Corporal Washington and his cooking staff worked from early morning until late at night, preparing quantities of food that seemed almost unimaginable to the German women who occasionally caught glimpses of the operation. 2 days before the holiday, the scent of roasting turkey began drifting across the compound. The rich aroma filled the air, making mouths water and stirring a hunger that many of the women had nearly forgotten how to describe. Anna was assigned to assist with preparing vegetables, which placed her directly inside the kitchen alongside the American cooks. There, she watched in astonishment as shipment after shipment arrived. Large sacks of potatoes were unloaded alongside cases of green beans, boxes of bread, an ingredient she could not even identify. Noticing her amazement, Corporal Washington smiled and used simple English words and gestures to explain what each ingredient would eventually become. To women who had spent the past year watching Germany's food supplies steadily disappear, the abundance seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Anna attempted to keep count of the turkeys being prepared. She gave up after 20. Each bird appeared enormous compared to the thin, undersized chickens that had occasionally appeared in wartime rations back home. That evening she eagerly described everything she had witnessed to the other prisoners. Some struggled to believe her. "No one prepares food like that for prisoners," Margaret insisted. "You must have misunderstood." Yet with every passing day, more evidence appeared. The mess hall was being decorated with autumn leaves and handmade paper ornaments. Long tables replaced the usual scattered arrangement of seating. Additional chairs were brought in and arranged in neat rows. Private Martinez and several other guards worked side by side with prisoners during the preparations, treating the effort more like a shared community project than a camp duty. The atmosphere throughout the compound felt noticeably different. For a brief time, it felt less like a prison camp and more like a place preparing for an important celebration. Greta found herself assigned to fold napkins and help arrange table settings, a task that felt strangely normal compared to everything she had experienced during the war. Working beside her was an older American soldier named Corporal Henry Miller. Patiently, he demonstrated how Americans traditionally arranged their holiday tables. As they worked, he showed her photographs of Thanksgiving gatherings with his family back in Ohio, sharing small glimpses of the life he hoped to return to once the war was over. "It's about being thankful," Corporal Miller said slowly, choosing his words carefully so Greta could understand. "Thankful for food, for family, for being alive. Even when times are hard, there's always something worth appreciating." The idea affected Greta more than she expected. Gratitude felt like something distant, almost forgotten. For months, survival had occupied every corner of her mind. Before her capture, her focus had been entirely on serving the WWII. But gratitude? She could not remember the last time she had truly felt it. The thought lingered with her long after the conversation ended. The evening before Thanksgiving, Sergeant Walsh conducted an inspection of the women's barracks. This time, however, she was not searching for hidden items or violations. Instead, she was making sure every woman had clean clothing for the following day. Quietly, she arranged replacement uniform pieces for prisoners whose clothing had become worn beyond repair. It was a small act, but it carried a clear message. Tomorrow's meal mattered, and the prisoners deserved to arrive looking their best. November 23rd, 1944, Thanksgiving Day. Thanksgiving morning arrived beneath cool autumn skies, a welcome change from Louisiana's usual humidity. Most of the women had slept very little. Excitement, curiosity, and uncertainty had made rest nearly impossible. They dressed carefully in their cleanest uniforms, helping one another straighten collars and smooth loose hair. The atmosphere felt almost like preparing for a formal inspection. Yet beneath the nervous energy was something else. Hope, fragile, cautious, but undeniably present. At 11 o'clock, the women assembled and were escorted toward the main mess hall. As they approached, the scent of roasted meat and freshly baked bread grew stronger with every step. The rich aroma was so overwhelming that several women felt lightheaded. They entered in silence. Their eyes adjusted slowly from the bright November sunlight to the softer light inside. Then they stopped. The hall had been completely transformed. Long tables stretched from one end of the room to the other, covered in white tablecloths. Every place had been carefully arranged with plates, utensils, cups, and folded napkins. But it wasn't the decorations that stole their attention. It was the food. Large platters of golden brown turkey lined the tables. Bowls of mashed potatoes steamed gently beneath melting butter. There were green beans, glazed carrots, stuffing, cranberry sauce, baskets overflowing with fresh bread, and at the ends of the table sat whole pies crowned with beautifully woven crusts. Margaret released a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Beside her, Elsa grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Greta felt tears fill her eyes. This was not prison food. It was not even military food. It was abundance, a level of abundance many of them had not witnessed in years. The sheer quantity seemed unbelievable, almost impossible. Some American soldiers were already seated, but they had deliberately left the most comfortable seats available for the German women. At the front of the hall, Major Fletcher gestured toward the tables. "Today," he announced, "we share a meal as Americans have done for generations. Today we give thanks for what we have, and we share it with everyone gathered here. Please, take your seats." Slowly, the women obeyed. Anna found herself seated beside Private Martinez and another young American soldier. Across from her sat Greta, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared at the empty plate before her. Elsa had already begun crying openly. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked around the room. Then the serving began. Corporal Washington and his kitchen staff moved along the tables carrying platters and serving bowls. Thick slices of turkey were placed onto Anna's plate. She stared at them in disbelief. Mashed potatoes followed, then green beans, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and more. By the time the serving ended, every plate contained more food than most of the German women had seen in a single sitting for years. These were not carefully measured rations designed merely to sustain life. They were generous portions, the kind served to welcome guests. For several moments, nobody spoke. The women simply stared. Margaret leaned toward the prisoner beside her and whispered in German, asking whether any of this could possibly be real. With trembling fingers, she touched the potatoes as if expecting them to disappear. The warmth convinced her they would not. Fresh tears followed immediately. All around the hall, similar scenes unfolded. Women who had spent years hearing stories about American shortages and cruelty sat surrounded by evidence proving otherwise. Major Fletcher rose and lifted his cup. In keeping with tradition, he said, "I want to give thanks for this meal, for the men and women serving here, and for the hope that one day this war will end and all of us can return to our families." The interpreter translated his words. Several women lowered their heads, thinking of distant homes and uncertain futures. A moment later, Corporal Washington called from near the kitchen, "Go ahead, everyone. Don't let it get cold." The American soldiers began eating. Their casualties reassured the Germans that they could do the same. Still, lifting a fork felt strangely significant, as though they were crossing an invisible boundary. Greta cut a small piece of turkey. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her mouth. The meat was tender, flavorful, and seasoned with herbs. For a moment, memory and taste merged together. She closed her eyes. This was food prepared with care. Food prepared by people who believed those eating it deserved something good. The realization hit her unexpectedly. For so long she had expected hardship that simple generosity felt almost impossible to accept. Nearby, Anna tasted the potatoes. Rich butter and creamy texture filled her mouth. Within seconds, tears were rolling down her face. She was not alone. Throughout the hall, women cried quietly while they ate, overwhelmed not only by the flavors they had nearly forgotten, but by the contradiction between everything they had been taught and everything they were now experiencing. Private Martinez noticed Anna's tears. Wanting to offer comfort, yet uncertain whether words would help, he simply passed her a basket of bread. The gesture required no translation. Anna accepted a piece and whispered one of the few English phrases she knew. "Thank you." The meal continued in a quiet atmosphere. Unlike the usual noise of a military dining hall, a sense of reverence filled the room. American soldiers watched former enemies experience something that seemed capable of breaking barriers stronger than fences or guard towers. As the initial shock slowly faded, something unexpected began to happen. People started talking, tentatively at first, then more naturally, because food has always possessed a unique ability to bring people together. Private Martinez pointed to different dishes and explained their names to Anna. "Turkey," he said. "Thanksgiving turkey." Anna carefully repeated the word. Across the table, Corporal Miller showed Greta photographs from his wallet. They depicted his wife, his daughters, and Thanksgiving celebrations at home in Ohio. Pointing to a family table loaded with food, he smiled. "Every year," he explained. "Like this, but at home." Greta studied the pictures. "Your daughters," she said carefully. "Very beautiful." The simple exchange opened the door for many others. Soon soldiers and prisoners alike were sharing stories. Americans spoke of grandmothers who spent days preparing meals, family traditions passed through generations, and arguments over who baked the best pies. The German women listened with fascination. The stories revealed a version of America completely different from the one they had been taught. Meanwhile, Sergeant Walsh sat with Elsa, Margaret, and several younger prisoners. She showed them photographs from previous Thanksgivings at military posts where she had served. "These are our traditions," she explained through the interpreter. "Even during war, we remember to be grateful and to share what we have." In response, Elsa removed a worn family photograph from her pocket. It showed her parents and younger siblings before the war. Quietly, she said, "This was Christmas 1941. The last time we were all together." Walsh looked at the photograph and saw not an enemy, but a young woman mourning a life that had been shattered. The realization was impossible to ignore. On both sides of the table sat people carrying the same hopes, fears, and losses, and for one extraordinary Thanksgiving day in 1944, they shared them together,